Welcome to my second web broadcast. My name is Chad Kister, author of Arctic Quest, Arctic Melting, and Against All Odds, and producer of the film Caribou People. I will be bringing you the latest news on the climate crises, focusing on what you can do to make a difference. This week's program features the need to undo damage that the Bush administration did to the Endangered Species Act and efforts to protect the polar bear. You have until May 9th, 2009 to submit comments in favor of protecting the polar bear. Second, the EPA issued a draft ruling regulating carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. You have until June to submit comments in favor of this regulation. Please don't delay. You can always add to your comments and encourage others to submit their own comments. Finally, this broadcast ends with a vision of high-speed rail in America with President Obama's April 16, 2009 speech. I will show how rail is a better way to travel while exponentially lowering your carbon footprint. The Center for Biological Diversity is an environmental group that has been working to protect the polar bear, seal, walrus, and other species using the Endangered Species Act. A statement from the Center for Biological Diversity reads that just before leaving office, the Bush administration dealt a parting punch to the Endangered Species Act across the nation, issuing two regulations intended to remove the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as an independent scientific watchdog over potentially species-harming federal projects like timber sales, mines, and dams. The Bush administration also exempted all greenhouse gas emitting projects, including coal-fired power plants and federal fuel efficiency standards, from Endangered Species Act review. The Bush administration also specifically banned federal agencies from protecting the imperiled polar bear from greenhouse gas emissions. These policies eviscerate the central Endangered Species Act process, Fish and Wildlife Service oversight that has protected endangered species for 35 years, and they exclude the greatest future threat to endangered species, global warming, from consideration under the Act. The policies are the subject of active lawsuits by the Center for Biological Diversity, other environmental groups, and 9 states. Thankfully, the Obama administration and Congress have taken the first steps towards rescinding the damaging Bush regulations. On March 3, 2009, President Barack Obama sent out a presidential memorandum ordering agencies to ignore the regulation blocking Fish and Wildlife Service project oversight. Then, on March 11th, Obama signed into law an omnibus appropriations bill giving Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar 60 days to rescind the Bush rules with the stroke of a pen and restore our nation's most critical and successful wildlife protection law to its former glory. The polar bear is under threat, and we need the Endangered Species Act in order to protect it. The polar bear have already reduced an average weight by 15% in the last 25 years, and they've also reduced in the number of cubs by about 15% in the last 25 years. Historically, about 90% of polar bears have their dens out on the ice of the Arctic Ocean. With that ice shrinking and melting, however, more and more polar bear are having their dens on land. 20 years ago, about 2/3 of polar bears had their dens on the ice in the Arctic Ocean, about 1/3 on land. Now, about 2/3 of polar bears have their dens on land, and only 1/3 of polar bears have their dens out on the ice in the Arctic Ocean. This shows a major change as the reduction of pack ice is harming the polar bear. It is clear that greenhouse gas emissions are the cause of the reduction of ice in the Arctic Ocean. Historically, ice was found about 15 miles from the shore of the Arctic Ocean at the farthest, and polar bear could swim out to the edge of the pack ice. With climate change, this ice is now often hundreds of miles from shore, and polar bears swim out, and they are now drowning by the dozens. At the end of his term, the Bush administration worked to water down the Endangered Species Act and water down protections for the polar bear. We need to overturn those rules. There is now a comment period where I encourage you to go to arcticrefuge.org or safeclimateact.org or chadkister.com and ask that the Bush administration's rules watering down the Endangered Species Act for polar bear protection be overturned. On April 17, 2009, the EPA proposed the regulation of 5 greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. These gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, and sulfur hexafluoride. These greenhouse gas emissions were found to cause global warming and threaten the public health and welfare of current and future generations. On April 2, 2007, the U.S. Supreme Court found that greenhouse gases are air pollutants covered by the Clean Air Act. The court held that the EPA administrator must determine whether or not emissions of greenhouse gases from new motor vehicles cause or contribute to air pollution. The United States Supreme Court ordered the U.S. EPA to determine whether carbon dioxide was a greenhouse gas. Now, the science has been so proven on this issue for so long that it's so obvious that it is. The science was found first back in the late 1800s by both the U.S. and Swedish scientists that found that carbon dioxide was a greenhouse gas. Both of them warned that burning fossil fuels would increase temperatures. This is very simple science. Why it took till April 17th of 2009 for the EPA to finally put into law that these are greenhouse gases, that these are a threat to humanity and other life on our planet, is all politics. It is the power of the fossil fuel industry. While some people contend that the proposed EPA regulations of greenhouse gas emissions are bad for the economy, I argue quite the opposite. In fact, regulating carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases will help our economy. It will help us to alleviate the concerns of Hurricane Katrina type disasters that will exponentially increase if we do nothing on this critical issue. Many economists and insurance companies are asking for regulations of greenhouse gas emissions because they are finding that extreme weather events are increasing exponentially, and we have got to do something to tackle the climate crises.